The screech of subway brakes echoes through the underground station as a haunting melody rises above the urban chaos. A lone figure sits against the cold concrete wall, his weathered guitar case open before him, collecting more whispers of judgment than coins. His fingers dance across worn strings, but the magic of his music seems lost on the rushing crowd. A sharp laugh cuts through his song. A group of impeccably dressed professionals stare down at him, their designer shoes gleaming under fluorescent lights. Someone should tell him to get a real job. One of them snickers, loud enough for everyone to hear. The musician's fingers falter for just a moment, but he keeps playing, his eyes fixed on his guitar as if it's his only friend in this hostile world. More people gather, but not to listen. They're drawn to the spectacle of cruelty unfolding in their mundane morning commute. Then everything changes. A figure in a simple black jacket pauses at the edge of the growing crowd. There's something familiar about him, but no one notices at first. They're too busy joining in the chorus of mockery. The musician starts another song, his voice barely a whisper now, nearly broken by the weight of their scorn. The man in black moves closer, and suddenly someone gasps. A ripple of recognition spreads through the crowd as he kneels beside the street musician. What happens next will remind everyone who witnesses it about the true meaning of humanity and leave even the coldest hearts in that subway station fighting back tears. This isn't just another story about a celebrity's random act of kindness. It's a moment that will transform everyone who sees it, forever changing how they look at the people they pass by every day. Mateo had been playing at the Grand Central Station tunnel for 3 years now, each morning setting up in the same spot where the acoustics made his guitar sing just a little sweeter. Today, the December air seeped through the underground passages, carrying with it the scent of coffee from nearby vendors and the metallic tang of approaching trains. His fingers, slightly stiff from the cold, moved across the strings of his battered Martin guitar, an inheritance from his grandfather, and the only thing of real value he owned. The morning rush surrounded him in waves of expensive wool coats and briefcases, smartphones and steaming paper cups. Mateo watched their feet as he played, noting how some would subtly step wider to avoid coming too close to his guitar case, as if his music might somehow stain their carefully crafted personas. The few coins scattered in his case caught the fluorescent lighting, their meager shine a testament to 3 hours of continuous playing. Mateo wasn't here for the money, not really. Music had been his escape since childhood, when his mother's piano lessons gave him the only peace he could find in their chaotic household. Now, at 32, he spent his days working as a janitor at a local high school and his mornings here, sharing the gift his grandfather had passed down to him. His evening shifts meant he could spend these precious morning hours doing what he loved most, even if most people hurried past without a second glance. Today, he was playing an original composition, something that had come to him during a late-night shift at the school. The melody spoke of hope and longing, his fingers weaving a tapestry of notes that floated through the station's stale air. A young girl, maybe 7 or 8, had stopped to listen, swaying slightly until her mother tugged her away with a disapproving glance in Mateo's direction. The morning light filtered through the station's street-level grates, creating patterns on the tiled floor, a dance of shadow and sunshine that seemed to move in time with his music. Mateo's worn denim jacket and faded plaid shirt stood in stark contrast to the parade of designer labels that streamed past him. His scuffed boots and the small tear in his jeans told a story that many chose to ignore, finding it easier to look away than to acknowledge the humanity in his music. A train arrived, disgorging another wave of commuters into the station. Among them, a group of financial district types emerged, their conversation cutting through Mateo's melody. They moved with the confident air of those who believed their success made them better than those around them, their leather shoes clicking against the tiles in a rhythm that clashed with Mateo's gentle guitar work. As they approached the spot, Mateo felt the atmosphere shift, the way it sometimes did before a storm. The first whisper came from a woman in a cream-colored designer suit, her pearl necklace catching the fluorescent light as she leaned toward her colleagues. "Look at this. Another wannabe musician thinking he can make it. Her words carried just enough volume to reach Mateo's ears, causing his fingers to hesitate for a split second before continuing their dance across the strings. A man in an expensive charcoal suit adjusted his gold watch, speaking loudly enough for others to hear. Someone should tell him the subway isn't a concert hall. Some of us are trying to start our workday without this racket. His comment drew chuckles from his companions, and a few nearby commuters slowed their pace, sensing the beginning of a scene. Mateo kept his head down, focusing on the melody flowing from his guitar. He'd faced mockery before, but something about this group felt different, their cruelty more deliberate, more practiced. Another man, this one carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Mateo made in a month, stepped closer to the group. "Hey, buddy," he called out, his tone dripping with false concern. "McDonald's is hiring. At least there you'd be earning honest money instead of begging." The group erupted in laughter, and Mateo felt his cheeks burn. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. "Music is a language of the soul, Mateo. Never let anyone silence your song." But the group wasn't finished. The woman in the cream suit turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers. "This is what's wrong with society today. Everyone thinks they're special, thinks they deserve attention. When I was starting out, I worked real jobs, 60-hour weeks." She gestured dismissively at Mateo's guitar case. "Not sitting around expecting handouts." Mateo's fingers trembled slightly, but he started a new song, "Bridge Over Troubled Water." The melody rose above their words, a quiet act of defiance. This only seemed to irritate them more. The man with the gold watch pulled out his phone, pointing it at Mateo. "This'll make a great social media post," he sneered. "Local talent in action. Maybe we can help him go viral. Just not the way he hopes." More laughter followed, and Mateo noticed other phones being raised, recording his humiliation for their entertainment. A young intern type in their group, previously silent, joined in, perhaps trying to impress his superiors. "My 5-year-old nephew plays better than this. At least he knows when to stop." The comment earned him approving looks from his colleagues, encouraging him further. "Maybe we should start a collection to buy him some actual music lessons." The crowd had grown larger now, forming a semicircle around Mateo and his tormentors. Some looked uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before them, but nobody stepped forward to intervene. A few even joined in with quiet snickers and whispered comments. Mateo could feel his throat tightening, his chest constricting with each barbed word thrown his way. The original woman spoke again, her voice carrying the weight of someone used to being listened to. "I bet he doesn't even have a permit to play here. Should we call security? Make this area pleasant again for actual commuters." She reached for her phone, making a show of looking up a number. Mateo's music had become almost mechanical now, his fingers moving from muscle memory, while his mind raced with memories of every doubt, every setback, every voice that had told him his dreams were worthless. The morning light seemed dimmer somehow, the station's usual bustle fading into a tunnel of cruel laughter and cutting remarks. Just as Mateo considered packing up his guitar, admitting defeat in the face of their relentless mockery, something changed in the atmosphere of the station. A subtle shift, like the moment before dawn breaks through darkness. Through the crowd's cruel laughter, footsteps approached, unhurried, deliberate. A tall figure in a well-worn motorcycle jacket and faded jeans moved quietly toward the scene. His long, dark hair fell across his face, partially obscuring eyes that took in everything with calm intensity. Most didn't notice him at first, too caught up in their entertainment at Mateo's expense. But there was something about his presence, a quiet gravity, that began to draw attention. The man with the gold watch was mid-sentence in another taunt when he caught sight of the newcomer. His words died in his throat as recognition dawned across his face. The woman in the cream suit followed his gaze, her perfectly maintained composure cracking for just a moment. A whisper rippled through the crowd. "Is that Keanu Reeves?" Mateo, still focused on his guitar, hadn't noticed the change in the atmosphere. His fingers continued moving across the strings, though his music had grown softer, almost apologetic. Keanu stood at the edge of the circle that had formed, listening. His expression remained neutral, but there was an intensity in his eyes as they moved from Mateo to the group of mockers and back again. The crowd's attention shifted completely now, phones that had been recording Mateo's humiliation swinging toward the unexpected celebrity in their midst. But Keanu paid them no attention. Instead, he moved closer to Mateo, his movements careful, as if approaching a wounded animal. The businessman with the leather briefcase took an involuntary step backward, his earlier bravado evaporating under Keanu's steady gaze. Mateo finished his song, the final notes fading into the station's artificial lighting. As he lifted his head, preparing for another barrage of mockery, he found himself looking up at Keanu Reeves. For a moment, confusion crossed his face. He clearly didn't recognize the man standing before him, only registering that someone new had joined his audience. Keanu knelt down, bringing himself to Mateo's eye level. The action sent another ripple through the crowd. Here was one of Hollywood's biggest stars, kneeling on the dirty subway floor next to a street musician. The contrast between this moment and the previous scene of cruelty was stark, and more than a few faces in the crowd reddened with shame. "That was beautiful," Keanu said, his voice quiet but carrying in the now silent station. "The way you modified the bridge in that last piece. It reminded me of something my friend used to play." His words weren't performative or showy. They carried the weight of genuine appreciation. Mateo blinked, surprised by the sincere comment about his technique. You noticed that?" he asked, his voice rough from hours of silence. The group of business people shifted uncomfortably, their expensive shoes suddenly seeming to weigh them down. "Music's always been special to me," Keanu continued, settling more comfortably beside Mateo. "Had a band once, played bass. Nothing like what you're doing here, though. This," he gestured to the guitar, the station, the space Mateo had created with his music. "This is pure soul." The woman in the cream suit had put her phone away, her earlier threat about security forgotten. The young intern who had tried to impress his superiors looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. But Keanu wasn't performing for their benefit. His attention remained solely on Mateo and his music. "Would you mind playing that original piece again?" Keanu asked. "The one you were doing when I walked up. There was something in there that caught my ear." His request was gentle, lacking any trace of the entitlement that had characterized the previous demands thrown at Mateo. The transformation in the station was palpable. The same space that had moments ago been filled with mockery and cruelty now held its breath in anticipation. Mateo's hands, which had trembled under the weight of ridicule, steadied as he positioned them on his guitar. The morning light streaming through the grates seemed brighter somehow, as if nature itself was acknowledging the shift in energy. Before Mateo could begin playing, Keanu reached into his jacket pocket. What happened next would turn this moment from merely remarkable into something unforgettable, something that would change not just Mateo's life, but the perspective of everyone who witnessed it. From his jacket pocket, Keanu pulled out not money but a small, worn photograph. He held it carefully, almost reverently, before showing it to Mateo. The image showed a young man with a guitar, sitting on a street corner not unlike where Mateo was now. The edges were creased, the colors faded. Clearly, this was something Keanu had carried with him for many years. "This was my friend Jimmy," Keanu said softly, his voice carrying a weight of memory. "He used to play on street corners in Toronto when I was just starting out. People would walk past him too. Some would laugh, some would say cruel things. But Jimmy never stopped playing." He paused, letting his words sink in as Mateo studied the photograph. The business group, still hovering nearby, had fallen completely silent. The woman in the cream suit was watching intently, her earlier superiority replaced by something that looked remarkably like shame. The man with the gold watch had stopped checking the time, his full attention captured by the scene unfolding before him. "Jimmy taught me something I never forgot," Keanu continued, his eyes meeting Mateo's. "He told me that music isn't about who's listening or what they think. It's about what happens in that space between the notes, where your soul touches someone else's, even if just for a moment. His fingers traced the edge of the photograph. He passed away 20 years ago, but every time I hear street music, I think of him. Mateo's hands cradled his grandfather's guitar with renewed reverence. My grandfather used to say something similar, he said, his voice growing stronger. He'd tell me that every song carries a piece of the person playing it, and sometimes that piece finds its way into someone else's heart when they need it most. Keanu nodded, a gentle smile crossing his face. Your grandfather sounds like he was a wise man. This guitar, it was his. He gestured to the worn instrument in Mateo's hands, noting the careful way Mateo held it, the subtle signs of years of maintenance and care. Yes, Mateo replied, his fingers automatically finding their position on the strings. He played it every day of his life until he couldn't anymore. Said it was more than just wood and strings. It was a bridge between souls. A small laugh escaped him. I used to think that was just something nice he said to make me practice more. The crowd had grown larger now, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different from before. People stood in respectful silence, many with tears in their eyes as they witnessed this unexpected connection between two seemingly different worlds. The young intern who had mocked Mateo's playing earlier was openly wiping his eyes. Music saved my life more than once, Keanu shared, settling more comfortably on the station floor, completely unconcerned with his jeans getting dirty. There were times when everything felt dark, when the world seemed too heavy to bear. But then I'd hear something, a melody, a rhythm, sometimes just a single note played with real feeling, and it would remind me that beauty still exists. Mateo nodded, understanding flowing between them. That's why I come here every morning, he admitted. Not for the money. I have a day job that pays the bills. But here, maybe someone who's having a rough morning might hear something that helps them face the day, like your friend Jimmy did for people. The woman in the cream suit had moved closer, her earlier disdain replaced by genuine interest. She wasn't the only one. The entire group of business people who had been mocking Mateo now stood transfixed, their expensive clothes and accessories seeming suddenly less important in the face of this authentic human connection. The thing about street musicians, Keanu said, his voice carrying clearly through the station, is that they remind us there's more to life than rushing from one place to another. They create moments of beauty in places where people have forgotten to look for it. He turned to address the crowd directly for the first time. Sometimes we're so busy proving our own worth that we forget to recognize it in others. The impact of his words was visible on every face in the crowd. The man with the gold watch glanced down at his expensive timepiece, then back at Mateo's worn guitar case, as if seeing both in a new light. The young intern's phone had disappeared into his pocket, his earlier attempt to record mockery forgotten in the face of genuine human connection. Mateo's fingers had begun moving almost unconsciously across the strings, playing soft, gentle notes that seemed to underscore Keanu's words. The melody was different now, stronger, more confident, but also more vulnerable. It was the sound of someone who had found unexpected understanding in a moment of despair. Keanu turned to Mateo, his eyes reflecting the station's fluorescent light. Would you play that original piece again? The one about hope. But this time, play it like you're not afraid of who might hear it. His request wasn't a command, but an invitation, a gentle nudge toward something transformative. Mateo straightened his shoulders, positioning his grandfather's guitar with renewed purpose. His fingers found their place on the strings, and for a moment he closed his eyes, gathering himself. When he began to play, the difference was immediate and profound. The melody that had earlier been a whisper now soared through the station, each note ringing with clarity and conviction. The song started softly, like morning light creeping through city windows. It built gradually, gaining strength and complexity, weaving together threads of hope and longing that seemed to touch something universal in everyone who listened. The businessman who had mocked Mateo's playing style now stood transfixed, his briefcase forgotten at his feet. As the music swelled, Keanu closed his eyes, nodding slightly in time with the rhythm. His presence seemed to give Mateo permission to pour everything into his performance. All the mornings of being ignored, all the moments of doubt, all the love for music that had kept him coming back despite everything. The notes danced through the station, bouncing off tiles and concrete, transforming the mundane space into something sacred. The crowd had grown larger, with newcomers drawn by the music and the unusual sight of Keanu Reeves sitting cross-legged on the subway floor. But Mateo wasn't playing for them anymore. He wasn't playing for anyone except himself and the music, just as his grandfather had taught him. His fingers moved across the strings with certainty and grace, drawing out emotions that words couldn't express. The woman in the cream suit had tears streaming down her face, her makeup forgotten. The young intern who had suggested a collection for music lessons now stood with his mouth slightly open, witnessing true artistry in the last place he'd expected to find it. Even the rushing commuters had slowed their pace, many stopping completely, drawn into the moment by the pure authenticity of what they were witnessing. As the song reached its crescendo, Mateo added variations he'd never played before, the music flowing through him like a river finding new paths to the sea. The notes spoke of struggle and persistence, of small kindnesses and unexpected connections, of the beauty that exists in the world if only we open our hearts to see it. Keanu watched it all, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He saw what everyone else was seeing, the transformation of a man who had been beaten down by mockery into someone who had found his true voice. The music wasn't just filling the station. It was changing it, changing everyone who heard it. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. No shuffling feet, no whispered conversations, no phones ringing. Just a lingering echo of something beautiful that had touched every person present. Then, as if a spell had been broken, the station erupted in applause. It wasn't the polite, obligatory kind that people sometimes give street performers. This was raw, genuine appreciation, the sound of hearts that had been genuinely moved. The group of business people who had started the morning with mockery were now at the front of the crowd, their earlier cruelty transformed into authentic admiration. The woman in the cream suit had opened her designer purse, but it wasn't to call security. She was reaching for something else entirely, something that would contribute to the next phase of this extraordinary morning. The aftermath of Mateo's performance unfolded like a scene from a dream. The woman in the cream suit stepped forward, tears still glistening on her cheeks. From her designer purse, she pulled out a business card and pressed it into Mateo's hand. "I'm a talent coordinator for the Grove. We host live music events, and what you just played, that needs to be heard by more people." Her voice shook slightly as she continued. "I was so wrong about you. We all were." The man with the gold watch had removed it from his wrist. He held it out to Mateo, who started to shake his head, but the man insisted. "My father gave me this watch when I made partner at my firm. He said it was to remind me that success isn't just about time and money. It's about what you do with them. I haven't lived up to that. Please take it. Sell it, keep it, whatever you want. Just keep playing." Keanu watched these transformations with quiet satisfaction, but he wasn't done yet. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something that made Mateo's eyes widen. A backstage pass to an upcoming charity concert. "We could use someone with your talent," he said simply. "Sometimes the best music comes from the streets, not the studios." The young intern who had mocked Mateo's playing was now frantically typing on his phone. "I'm posting about this on social media," he announced, "but not to make fun. People need to hear your music. They need to know what happened here today." His fingers paused over the screen. "And they need to know how wrong we all were about judging people without knowing their story." Other commuters began approaching, dropping not just coins but bills into Mateo's guitar case. More importantly, they were leaving notes, business cards, phone numbers, opportunities. One woman said her daughter needed guitar lessons. A music teacher from a nearby school asked if he'd consider giving a talk to his students about perseverance and passion. Mateo sat there, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. His grandfather's guitar rested in his lap, its worn wood seeming to glow with new purpose. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him in the moment. "This is what happens," he said quietly, "when you play without fear, when you show people your true self." The businessman with the briefcase had been silent for a while, but now he stepped forward. "I walk past the spot every morning," he admitted. "From now on, I'm going to stop and listen, and I'm going to remember how it felt to be so completely wrong about someone." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small notebook. "My card's in here, too. If you ever need anything at all, you call me." The transformation wasn't just in the offers and opportunities. It was in the way people looked at Mateo now, with respect and recognition of his humanity. It was in the way the business group's faces had softened, their expensive clothes no longer serving as armor against the world's beauty. Most importantly, it was in Mateo himself, sitting straighter, his music finally heard not just with ears but with hearts. As the morning crowd began to thin, Keanu stood up, brushing off his jeans. "Keep playing your truth," he said to Mateo. "That's all any of us can really do." With a final nod to the crowd, he turned and walked away, leaving behind a station full of people forever changed by what they had witnessed. Today, the spot where Mateo plays at Grand Central Station has become something of a landmark. Regular commuters make a point to stop and listen, often sharing his story with newcomers who pause to hear the music. The guitar case that once collected mockery now overflows with appreciation, not just in dollars, but in notes of gratitude and inspiration. The business group that had started that transformative morning became Mateo's most devoted supporters. The woman in cream suit still comes by, but now she brings other music industry professionals to hear him play. The young intern started a social media campaign that turned Mateo's morning performances into must-see events, proving that redemption can be found in the most unexpected ways. Keanu's words about playing without fear became Mateo's mantra. He still works his janitor job at the high school, but now he also teaches guitar there after hours, showing students that music isn't about status or expensive instruments. It's about what lives in your heart. The watch given to him by the businessman sits in a frame on his wall, not as a symbol of monetary value, but as a reminder that change is always possible. The story spread beyond the station, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. People started treating street musicians differently, not just in New York, but in cities everywhere. They began to understand that every person they pass has a story, has value, has something to teach them if they only take the time to listen. Mateo still plays his grandfather's guitar every morning, but now when his fingers dance across the strings, they carry not just his own story, but the story of how one moment of kindness can ripple out and transform countless lives. His music reminds us all that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with a single note played from the heart.